That conversation ended 2 hours ago. You're still in it. Not because something terrible happened, just because there was a moment where you went quiet, and you can't stop reviewing it. Maybe someone asked you something simple, you had an answer, and then it was just gone. And now, hours later, you're running the whole thing back, thinking about what you should have said. Most people land on the same explanation for this. They think, I went quiet because I have nothing interesting to say. I'm boring. That's just how I am. That explanation feels true, but it's probably not the accurate one. And the difference between those two things matters a lot. Here's what may actually be happening. Conversations use attention, and attention is limited. When you're in a conversation, your attention is supposed to be on the other person. What they're saying, how they're reacting, what comes next. But when you start feeling social pressure, that sense that you're being watched, judged, evaluated, part of that attention shifts. It turns inward. Now part of you is listening to the conversation, and part of you is watching yourself be in the conversation. Are my hands weird right now? Did that sentence make sense? Why did I pause so long? That internal monitoring takes up real cognitive space, and with less attention on the conversation, responses get harder to find. One useful way to think about it, your brain has a limited working space. When pressure fills part of that space, less of it is available for the actual conversation. The words don't disappear, they just become harder to access under pressure. Research generally supports this kind of mechanism. Social pressure can reduce how easily you retrieve familiar responses. Let's put this in a real situation. You're in class. The teacher asks a question. You know the answer. But before you raise your hand, you start rehearsing how it should sound. Should I phrase it this way? What if I get the wording wrong? And while you're rehearsing, you stop processing the actual question. The teacher calls on you. Half of what you were going to say is now gone. It wasn't that you didn't know the answer. It's that your attention was split between knowing the answer and managing how knowing the answer would look. Now let's look at a different situation. You're in a group, the conversation is moving fast. Everyone's adding something. You have something to contribute, but before you speak, you scan the group. Will this land? Is it the right moment? Does it even make sense now? By the time you finish evaluating, the conversation has moved on. Someone else said something close to what you were going to say. The moment passed. And later, you replay that moment. Why didn't I just say it? Was I scared? Am I just too slow? But the more useful question isn't why am I like this? It's where did my attention go in that moment? Because the answer to that question is almost always the same. It went to monitoring yourself instead of staying in the conversation. Now, here's something that might actually change how you feel about these moments. Studies published in Psychological Science found that people consistently underestimate how much others like them after a conversation. Consistently. The moment you thought was awkward, the other person most likely moved on from it before you even finished talking. Your brain is still in that conversation. The other person forgot it happened. That's not a criticism, that's actually useful information. It means the stakes in your head are higher than the stakes in the room. And that gap between how it felt and how it actually landed is where a lot of unnecessary self-monitoring comes from. Let's go to a third situation. This one is more specific. You're talking one-on-one with someone whose opinion matters to you. A friend, maybe, or someone you've just met and want to make a decent impression on. The conversation is actually going fine. And then, almost out of nowhere, you become aware that you're in the conversation. You start listening to your self-talk. Half your attention is now watching yourself. The other half is supposed to be listening. And the person in front of you keeps talking. You miss something they said, and now you're nodding at something you didn't fully hear, which adds another layer of pressure. So you go a little quieter, which you then interpret as going quiet because you have nothing interesting to say. And the loop closes. This is what we could call a self-monitoring loop, a practical label, not a diagnosis. Pressure increases self-awareness. Self-awareness reduces available attention. Reduced attention makes responses harder, which creates more pressure. And this loop can reinforce itself across multiple conversations because every time it happens, you add it to a running record of proof that you're not good in social situations. The problem with that record is that it's selective. You file the moments where you went quiet. You don't file the moments where the conversation was fine. That selective filing is its own problem, and it's worth noticing. But let's stay on the mechanism, because that's where the useful part is. If the problem is attention splitting, some going to the conversation, some going to monitoring yourself, then the direction to move is not to stop caring. It's to notice when the split happens. Not to judge yourself for it, just to notice it. part of my attention just went somewhere else. That small recognition can interrupt the loop before it fully closes. The second part is to reduce pressure slightly. Not eliminate it, but reduce it. One way to do that is to lower the stakes of the next thing you say. Instead of trying to say something impressive, say something real. A simple observation about what's actually in front of you. Something like, has this line been this slow all day? Or in a classroom setting, was that part confusing for you too? These aren't clever, they don't need to be. The goal of a simple observation isn't to impress anyone. It's to bring your attention back to the actual moment, and to leave space for the other person to respond however they want. That last part matters. Some people won't engage. The context may not be right. That's not a failure of the approach, it's just how conversations work. Context and culture always matter. What reads as friendly in one setting can feel intrusive in another. You're reading a situation, not executing a script. So here's the small experiment to try before your next conversation. Not a technique, just a single question to hold in the back of your mind. When you notice yourself going quiet, ask, where is my attention right now? Is it on this person or is it on me? That's it. No script. No list of clever things to say. Just noticing where the attention went, because that's the moment the loop started. And the next time you replay a conversation hours later, and you probably will, at least for a while, try to remember this. The stakes in your head were almost certainly higher than the stakes in the room. The other person likely moved on. They liked you more than you think. Studies on this, published in Psychological Science, found this pattern holds across many types of conversations, not just a few edge cases. You're not broken. You're not boring. You have a pattern. And patterns are things you can notice, interrupt, and gradually adjust. That conversation that ended 2 hours ago, you were there, you showed up. That already mattered more than the part you're still editing. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe. There's a lot more on conversation, attention, and what actually happens in everyday social situations.